Greetings, my excellent YouTube friends. I am recording this on August 25th, 2022, which marks roughly my 2-year anniversary of my YouTube channel. And I figured what would be more appropriate than re-reviewing one of the first swords I ever reviewed, which is this Lyuesword Unokubi Zukiri. I think I'm even wearing the same shirt I was wearing that in the original review. Now, I've had this sword for, well, obviously 2 more years. Had a lot more use out of it, a lot more experience with it, and a lot more swords I've acquired in the meantime to compare it to. So, what do I think about it now? How is it held up? Do I still like it? Anything I don't like about it compared to that initial review, and maybe I can get into more detail because, yeah, those early reviews were pretty rough. All right, I'm promising to put more detail into this review than the original, but I don't want to make it insanely long, so let's just get right into specs, fit and finish, and then we'll do a stand-up handling demonstration to give you a sense of how I feel like it feels. And what about value for the money? Let's start there. First of all, how much money are we talking about? $238. It's still available on the Lyuesword website. I'll put the link down in the description for you. Spoiler alert, for that much money, do I think you're getting a good value? Absolutely. Are there some cost-cutting measures in place? Oh yeah, and we'll talk about that. And does that affect any of the reasons why, well, maybe the sword doesn't compare well to other swords versus certain areas where it actually compares very, very favorably to other swords in that price range. But let's start with those specs. On the friendly end, your Tsuka is 10.5 inches, which is a little bit shorter than some of the other ones you might get from the Longchuan forges or Hanwei or whatever. But I like a slightly shorter Tsuka because I'm used to, as I've mentioned many times, Shingunto, they usually have a 9.5, 10-inch Tsuka, and you're choking up a little bit because you've got the Kabutogane pommel cap on it, you know, the Tachi style that makes you grip it a little bit higher. So for me, being a short guy and the way I'm used to using a sword, the shorter one is great. But more than it just being short, it's surprisingly, as I mentioned in the original review, surprisingly slender. And for my small hands and when I was wearing the brace and had even less grip girth, that was a nice thing. And still is. It still feels really good. And yeah, I'll get to handling here, well, when I get up out of this chair. But if you look at it compared to a Musashi Silver Series, which I feel like has a medium girth cotton wrapped grip, it's not a big thick baseball bat axe handle of a grip, but it is what I consider a medium stout grip. There's definitely a difference. There's also a difference you're going to see in the size of the diamonds. Not just the fact that this is a katatemake wrap, but these are very small, very well done diamonds on it. And the Ito, even though it's, you know, they say it's silk, I don't really know if it's real silk or not. It's probably a synthetic or something like that. The diamonds have stayed, everything stayed really tight. So build quality on this end's really good. I haven't had to lacquer it or anything else like I've had to do with other swords that I've gotten that come with loose Ito or get loose with use. No, nothing. I've used this sword a lot. We'll talk about that. Handling. So feels great, build solid. Nakago, it is a double pin, and I'll show you a picture of the Nakago. Nakago goes down to 1 inch past the lower pin, so almost all the way down to the end of the Tsuka. Pretty solid build. Everything's really tight. I've taken this apart numerous times, and everything has stayed completely tight. Now, I'll show you I'll show you the picture of the Nakago. It's nothing special. It's very raw. It's not signed, it's not pretty, it's not refined. But, you know, again, cost-cutting measures. It's also got an odd extra hole in it. I can't explain. Maybe they tried mounting it on as a different build and changed their mind and put it on this one. I don't know. But the blade length is 28 inches, which is kind of common for what you're going to get for a modern Chinese-made reproduction. A little bit longer than my historic swords. It has a longer, almost an okasaki, which is not my favorite thing. I like a shorter one, but it does fit kind of the aesthetic of this sword. You'll also notice it's not in the build, it's not a geometric one, but it does have that, you know, they just polished it with a sharp line to give you that division point, that yokote between the Kisaki and the made blade plane. Lines are great. Planes crafting is even. Weight is 2 pounds 3 ounces, which does make it a couple of ounces lighter than a lot of my other reproductions. Point of balance, though, 3 5/8 inches, which is like right in the middle of the spectrum for the swords that I have, and it's in my sweet spot. But as I mentioned in that original review, I bought this Unokubi Zukiri profile, which is not a common historic profile for a Japanese-style sword in Uchigatana. Something you tend to see more on Naginata than on Uchigatana. But it's getting to be more common. I think it's because it has an aesthetic and it's kind of exotic. I picked it because I figured it would give me a lighter blade. I had just been injured. I was just starting my recovery. Could barely handle a sword at all. Plus, having a narrower grip was great because my grip girth was reduced with the brace on, which you'll see I don't have right now. Things have improved. But I've collected a couple of these profiles, and you'd be surprised. Balance and weight compared to just a Shinogi Zukiri with a, you know, a full large bohie on it. Yeah, I'll probably do a video on that. It's kind of surprising. It didn't really make the sword significantly lighter than similar swords. It didn't really make the point of balance that much closer to the hand. But as you'll see in handling, this is a nimble, light, maneuverable blade. Let's talk about build and quality and where some of those cost-cutting measures are. I mentioned, you know, the Nakago is, you know, it's not refined. It's very fine. It's real same, but it's very fine-grained same under here, and they are just panels. It's actually some, and I'll show you a breakdown of the sword taken apart, some even ends. The wood core has no cracks in it. Like I said, everything has stayed really tight, including these, what seem like these Minuki would just not be very secure. They are. They've stayed absolutely put for 2 years. Now, Fuchi, Kashira, Tsuba are some kind of brass copper alloy that has been painted with a patina. There are patina compounds that specifically turn brass kind of a rust color that you can get. And I think that's what they used on here. It's not paint, but the brushwork is not the best. It's pretty flawed on all these parts and sloppy, and I've cleaned it up myself by hand for my own sanity. Also, fit and finish, the castings, they're kind of muddy. I mean, they've got some detail to them, but they're not really crisp. Again, you see signs of cost cutting. They're a little blobby, they're a little muddy, they're a little lumpy. There are no seams on the sides, that's nice. But also, what you're looking at now with the Fuchi and Kashira specifically, you're going to see that there's no, and I'll show you close-up photos, no ledges. That's not how it came. There were some ledges. So what I had to do was get out my fine little hammer and some fine files and some fine grit sandpaper, and I did some reshaping and some polishing. It took a little bit of work to take some of the sharp corners off, and you can see some wear on some of the parts where, you know, you can see that the patina is worn away there, where I did that fine tuning. Didn't take a lot of work, but once it was done, no hot spots. And everything stayed put. Let's talk about the Tsuba. I got it because it intrigued me. It's a double lobe Musashi style, and as you've seen from my other videos, I'm a big fan of Musashi. But all the edges are very round. It's very comfortable. It's also a little smaller than your average Musashi style or other style Tsuba. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a comparison a little bit side by side here. This is the cheap stamped one that came off my Musashi Silver that I since replaced with something a lot nicer. But yeah, it's different in diameter and, well, obviously this is really thin, but the average Tsuba that you're going to get on a modern reproduction, it's going to have a bigger Tsuba than this. But then I'm used to, again, Shingunto style small one, and I'm not going to use this sword in live blade-on-blade sword fighting, so the fact that it's got a little less hand protection is not a big deal. Also, even though there's not a lot of metal here, it doesn't really throw the balance off. That's one of my concerns when I see a Tsuba that doesn't have a lot of metal in it. that the balance point is just going to be wrong for me. And the balance point on this one, it's just right. Again, I'll talk about that more in handling. But back to cost cutting. Now you've got two copper SEPA. They're not fancy, but hey, it's copper instead of the brass you usually get. But yeah, one of the problems is the middle, and I forget the exact terminology for the middle part of the Suba, is a lot smaller than the SEPA are. So there's a huge amount of just sharp overlap here. Now my hand doesn't get in there, so I never contact it, but it is kind of visually jarring. And I've considered going in there with files or my Dremel or grinder or sander or whatever, and just reshaping this so everything's flush. But I'm never going to get it perfectly flush because that Suba, the middle of it there, it's smaller than the Fuchi. So there's always going to be some ledge somehow. So I just haven't bothered to do it because I haven't figured out how I can do it and make it, well, better than what it is. Habaki has stayed tight. Everything stayed tight. But as I mentioned in the original video, I thought I thought, oh, this is a cool looking sculptured Habaki. I kind of come to hate it. I like more traditional designs, or even just plain, a lot better. And it's not just about the visual, as I mentioned in the earlier video. All these sharp edges on here grab the mouth of the saya and actually act kind of as a rasp to wear away at that wood. So if I'm not careful, I wind up having to do a lot of shimming and readjusting because I'm losing wood as this comes in and out of the koikuchi. So that's a concern. Blade, $238, awesome. But it is in that realm of modern reproductions that are designed for backyard cutters and maybe competition cutters. So it is a razor blade. It is very thin, very fine, very sharp edge all the way down, and it has stayed that way. I haven't had to do much in terms of rehoning or anything else with this in a couple of years. It's got a very good edge. We'll talk about the steel in a second and the hardness and stuff like that. But yeah, it doesn't have much meat behind the edge at all. So if this was going to hit a hard target, my rather risky steel on steel test, no, this would not do well. So I'm not going to use it for any of that. This is for soft targets and form practice only. But I'm going to put up a couple of photos. I told the story of this getting lost in shipping for 7 months. I ordered it right before 2020 became 2020. And Ruan at Lyuesword was awesome in terms of following it and trying to keep track of it and trying to find it when it got lost. And he eventually sent me a second one on his own dime with express shipping, and it got to me in a couple of weeks. So this is the replacement. This is the one I've been using most often. The original one is back there. It's back there on the wall. It's been there most of the time. I take it out every once in a while just to move it around and clean it up. But I'll show you some pictures because even though they're the same model, same price, there's a lot of differences that speak to handmade quality. Where on the other sword, the Kisaki, it's longer. It's a different profile. Also, the bohi terminate in different places between the two swords. Now, they're perfectly even from side to side on each sword, and they're very crisp. They're very well done. All the planes are very flat and even and not lumpy. They're very well done. The bevel for the Unokubi Zukiri also terminates in a different spot on both swords. So again, speaks to handmade quality. They've got significant visual differences when you put them side by side. But where the money really is coming in, not just the handcrafting, which is quite a lot of surprising perfection. Other again, they did a lot of cost cutting up here at the Yokote. All right. Polish it's probably a machine polish. But one thing I didn't mention in the original video because I didn't read the fine print, I was kind of surprised when I discovered it in the certificate in the website. Their own Damascus blend is a 1095, 1060, and that's what I thought I was looking at. But this is actually Sanmai. And I can tell because I spent a lot of time with the thing and cleaned it and oiled it and, yeah, taken a good look at it. And you can see, compared to my other swords that I've acquired since that are just completely folded steel versus my other ones that are Sanmai, you could definitely see a transition on the edge. Last about probably 3/8 of an inch there. And on, what you can see in terms of the spine, there is a transition where there's no folding. So it's probably a 1095 core with some folded steel slab sides, and there's no flaws, no delaminations, anything like that. So yeah, that extra for the money is pretty awesome. Now the grain, and it's really, my cameras don't really show it. You could probably see better pictures of it on the Lyuesword website when they give you the macros on that. But I've certainly seen Chinese-made folded steel swords that, they're very bold, shall we say, very pronounced wood grain pattern for appearance, but that could, include flaws, might not be as structurally strong. And I have some swords that are folded steel that are a lot finer than this. This is kind of in the middle. It's subtle, but still pronounced, so I think they did a pretty good job on the folding. So again, I think for the money, there's a couple of things in here that cost cut. Let's talk really quick about this scabbard, because Saya is one of them, unfortunately, and I did mention this a little bit. The two I've got are made out of different woods. One is white wood, and this one's more of a red wood. And it does kind of make some difference in terms of how they hold up, in terms of wear and tear and how many adjustments and shims and stuff I've had to do with it. Now, cost cutting. There's no horn. That's just wood, and it's kind of reinforced by the fact that the upper, third of it is wrapped in probably rattan. So there's some reinforcement there. Nothing on this, just wood too. It does have a nice mottled finish, but the paint hasn't held up, especially where the rattan is, and you can see it, and I'll show you some close-ups. The paint just keeps flaking off this top end of the sword. I'm constantly touching this thing up. I just set it down and it's got a new chip in it, and okay. The Sugeo, they gave you at least that thicker cord that's a little nice, doesn't look like she left over wrap, so that was a good thing. But when we get to handling and drawing, we're going to discover that the inside of the scabbard is not very finely tuned. So let's get to that. All right, for the 2-year anniversary of the channel, Mike invested in a new camera with a new speaker setup. Let me know if you notice any differences in quality. But hopefully the speaker setup will give you what I'm trying to demonstrate. So listen. Hear that? Hear that? Doesn't really matter if I draw the sword edge up or edge sideways. Even putting it away, edge up. Yeah, if you're going for a nice, peaceful Zen Iaido, this is gonna kill your calm. And it is one of the things that does really annoy me about the build and shows me clear cost cutting. The inside of the saya is really rough, and it's exacerbated specifically by the shape of the Unokubi Zukiri. What do I mean by that? When the relief cut ends here at the Kasaki, there's a pronounced diamond right here, and I feel like that's what's rubbing against like every flaw and lump inside that saya. And I have a couple of other Unokubi Zukiris that don't do it this badly, so it tells me it's probably a combination between the sword shape and the saya, and maybe even the wood, because the white wood one doesn't make nearly as loud a noise as this redwood one. I think it's a harder wood. So yeah, it's just, oh my god, yeah. And like I said, I've had to do a little adjustments on the Koiguchi to adjust tightness. Sometimes it's depending on wear and tear and also climate. It can be too tight, it can be too loose and drop out. So yeah, it's needed a little bit there, and you might be nervous because there's no horn reinforcement on your Koiguchi. So depending on how you feel about that. Now, when it comes to actually doing kata forms and other kind of drill practice, this is, as I said, it's a pleasure to wield. It's comfortable in the hand, it's comfortable in the grip. Suka length is great, weight and balance. Yeah, it feels lovely. Just being able to wield this thing is just amazing. I love the way it moves. It just does such a good job for me that, yeah, I pick it up a lot because it just feels so good in the hand. Now, is it the best workout because it's a little bit lighter than some of my other sides? No, but it moves quickly, smoothly, does indeed feel like it's an extension of me, except for the saya. Now, a couple of other things I should mention, and I'll probably talk about this in other videos. As I said that, you know, compared to a Shinogi Zukiri profile with a full bohi, there really isn't a lot of difference in the weight reduction and the balance. But one of the things that is potentially problematic about this profile is this sharp bevel. Doing any hand-on blade stuff, got to keep my hand, because you tend to put your pressure on the spine, I got to keep my hand down here where it has the full mune. When I get up here, it gets a little uncomfortable, and I don't feel like I can really control it, get a hold of it, or take a hit on it without it, well, losing control over it or hurting myself. It's not sharp, but it's kind of sharp. So that's something to consider in terms of using a sword like this. Also in doing noto, when I go to resheath it, there is definitely a difference of how it rides in my fingers. And when I combine that with the really sharp, long kisaki, especially on its brother, I have been known to slop it. And if you slop it with a kisaki that is that needle sharp, you're going to pay for it, or at least I did a few times, so it makes me a little less comfortable with the noto than a more common Shinogi Zukiri, so consider that. But otherwise, I mean, the blade quality and the build and the cutting. Now, I probably disappointed you by not doing a lot of cutting, and I will address that in another video. Mike spends most of his practice time doing forms and drills. That's my thing. That's my thing across many martial arts. And then, you know, when I have the opportunity using a blunt analog to do, you know, live fencing and partner practice and stuff like that, Mike just doesn't do a lot of cutting. I'll do it when I have the materials available and I have a sword that I want to test. But this is a topic that's come up in other people's videos, and I will probably address it myself, that when we're talking about the modern needs of the backyard cutter, or maybe the competition cutter, the mat cutter, the grass cutter, versus what, well, even my old antique examples that have a lot more niku, a lot more meat in the blade, and then also compare that, and I do plan to do comparisons of Japanese swordsmanship and swords with European equivalents to look at the similarities in techniques as well as some of the key differences. And there are certainly key differences in what the Japanese would call niku. This is definitely a blade that was designed for slicey, but not impact. Now, it's probably resilient enough that it's not going to bend on me, hasn't yet in the target cutting I've done. And I've taken it to bottles and cardboard and some softwood just to see what it would do, but I'm not whacking this into anything hard. Have I had some bad cuts? Yeah, and I did mention in the early video that I accidentally hit a ceiling fixture and took a bend on the tip that I had to straighten out and repolish. Yeah, it's not the most sturdy, abusable axe-like edge. Much more of a big straight razor. So, depends on what you intend to use your tool for. All right, that said, hopefully that was a better follow-up video than the original video was. Again, I was just starting out way back then, really didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what you guys liked, and also didn't, again, have a lot of other swords yet to compare it to, didn't have a lot of time behind this sword to really get a sense of the stuff that I really like about it, and some of the things that make me go, yeah, I can see why it's $238. But I think it's $238 well spent. Certainly don't regret it. Use it a lot. It's one of my favorites, right on top of my rack next to my desk. That said, let's get our conversation going in the comments. Happy to answer any questions that you've got. Until next time, like I said, I'm planning to do some comparisons. That's one of the things I've been working on while you haven't seen me recently. Been doing a lot of training comparing HEMA to traditional Japanese and Chinese swordsmanship. Hopefully I'll get you some good, meaningful content in that realm. And yes, I am planning on redoing some of my other early reviews now that I have more experience, not only doing the reviews, but with the swords. Otherwise, as always, always, thanks for watching. Thanks for following. Thanks for subscribing. I'm currently at 950. I'm close, guys. So get the word out, please. Sharing, commenting. I love our conversations. I've made so many awesome friendships in 2 years. Thank you all so much. And I'll see you back for, well, whatever I manage to get in the queue next.